Yes, you can go ahead.
My name is Privilege. I'm Deutsche German International Broadcaster. Just to ask Minister on the measure that we have introduced to entrench multi-currency system and the auction system into law. How is this going to be carried out, and is this not retrogressive in the spirit of what has been said, to say that you need to buttress the local currency more than promoting the multi-currency system?
Maybe take three at a time. Second one.
Thank you, Takuchi Ambaku from Zimbabwe's TV. You speak of restoration of advancement awards. This is something we read in February when the $100 was introduced. And when you speak to Apex Council, Mrs. Alexander, for example, she says nothing has sufficed. Is this not another talk show where we're hearing things which will not be implemented? And when you also tell us that you're signing the multi-currency system into law, and yet in your observations you stated that there is a preference of the US dollar for domestic transactions, isn't this then allowing people to actually be skewed towards the US dollar even more? Thank you.
Can you see me?
Third one.
Third one.
Yeah. Hey, Andy, go ahead.
Thank you, Minister. My first question, Minister, is that this raft of schemes or incentives you've given to health, judiciary, civil servants and parliament, was this budgeted for in your previous budget, or does it imply that you have to have a supplementary budget on it? You talked about your first presser looking at stabilization of the exchange rate and inflation. I'm not clear how these measures are going to tackle an inflation of 191%. That you mentioned about, because it doesn't seem like there's anything new in there about inflation rate. And I've got a couple of questions. My third question is, you talked recently about M0 being under control in terms of an inflation driver, but you also said that broad money wasn't. So I needed to understand what you meant by that, and also how you're going to get broad money under control. And my last question, Minister, because I know I could go on all day. My last question is, we've just received the presser from the Monetary Policy Committee. It's just been officially released, and they've increased interest rates to 200%. And my concern about that, of course, is banks' books, how that will affect banks' books, particularly NPLs, and so forth. I mean, I won't get into the other issues they released, because I've just received it now, official presser. But that's the major question, is NPLs and how you're going to manage banks' books becoming bad. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take some of the questions. I'll pass some of them on to my colleagues here up front. The first one pertains to someone from the German agency, and that question was pertaining to what? So,
Okay.
Remind me.
I asked, it has always been said that the local currency is the way to go. We need to buttress the local currency. Now that you are entrenching the multi-currency system into law, is that not retrogressive?
So that's the gist of the question. Basically, we are entrenching the multi-currency system in the sense that we've already announced that the use of the US dollar will continue over the NDS1 period. So we want to provide assurance to the market that there is no reversal of policy around this exchange rate system that we've adopted, and want to assure you, the public, that this will continue over the NDS1 period, and want to buttress it. We have a situation where you can make use of the US dollar for domestic transactions, or make use of the domestic currency. You are free to choose. So we're buttressing that and continue with that policy. And then from, was it Chiambakwe? We referred to the issues of advancements, that these have not been honored. I'm emphasizing that these will be honored. And we've said that from the 1st of July, these will be paid. That's an announcement. And then you also seem to imply that the putting these exchange rate issues into law is entrenching the US dollar as against the Zimbabwe dollar. No, we're entrenching both. From Andy Hodges, basically we're saying that there's nothing in here that supports the notion of price stability. Certainly the release of grain from the GMB, both wheat and maize, should go a long way in improving a supply in a way that should help us tackle any supply constraint driven increases in prices from maize or wheat related products. And then in terms of salaries, basically we're making sure that civil servants have an additional income to make sure that they can tackle the increases in inflation that we're seeing. In terms of tackling broad money, basically the increase in interest rates, I didn't want to announce that. I wanted the government to announce it, so you got it.
Yeah.
So that is exactly how we're dealing with the growth in demand for credit by increasing the price of money, which is the interest rate. I'm simplifying it. That should go a long way in making sure that we reduce the demand for unnecessary credit in the economy. But notice that the 200% interest rate is in line with the year-on-year inflation that has been recently released at 191 or 92%, year-on-year. Yeah, we referred to the issue that perhaps this will push up NPLs and so forth. On that note, I'll hand over to Piers Bumatanda to further elaborate on the issue of the interest rates and NPLs. And Fumbe, if you wanted to add on any of the issues.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Look, I spent 28 years lending money, and there's one very clear aspect. NPLs are caused by bad lending, never by interest rates. And I think I need to add that we actually need a complete rethink of the Zimbabwean business model that we are currently running. We cannot have corporates in this country continue to have business models that are both based on monopoly pricing and unreasonable market power, access to cheap credit, access to cheap foreign currency, access to cheap power, because they are always coming to ZTC and to ZESA wanting sub-economic tariffs, access to cheap energy or cheap fuel, and we even struggle. We actually have some companies that want to do some canning of tomato, wanting to get a national project status, because they also want access to lower taxes. So the business model of most corporates here has been based on these 4 or 5 fundamentals, which we need a complete rethink on. So this argument that the productive sector will not be able to borrow, you should be able to sustain your business on correct borrowing and correct interest rates. Actually, the lack of confidence that we all write about on a daily basis is actually a reflection of the inability for us to create savings. So we also now need to restore the value of savings, because that is the only way we can create long-term capital. So again, we have had the corporates that have been subsidized, and I will hesitate to say this, by pensioners, widows, and orphans, by paying sub-economic interest rates. And that is actually, in turn, hurts the creation of capital, and hurts the pensioners, hurts the savers, at the expense of actually creating savings in the economy. So that argument, I think we need to take it off the table and have business that can sustain themselves in this economy on the basis of correct fundamentals. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
So, Minister, there's one more issue. I mentioned that whether you need a supplementary budget, because this seems like it was not budget for some of the announcements you've made. Would you need to introduce a supplementary budget to make your books balanced?
So far, in terms of our assessment, these increases are within the current budget. We are still assessing as to whether we need a supplementary budget or not. But remember, a supplementary budget also relies on additional revenues because we've been living within our means. So we have the revenues first to be able to spend those revenues and therefore request Parliament to allow us to spend those revenues. So we'll come back to you in due course of that. Thank you. Let's do, I think, 3 more. Yeah.
Ranger from Bloomberg. Could you please advise Minister on your projection for growth rates in line with the measures that you announced today? Thank you.
My name is from Newsday. My question is to the Minister. You have been talking about surplus and good economic performance, whilst our inflation...
In this statement?
Okay. Are we in an economic crisis? Yes, about.
I thought you said there's a surplus. Very well.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. My name is Tatira Junaira, I'm with Newsday. I don't think there was a question you were asked about how exactly putting a law to support the multi-currency system is going to address stabilize the exchange rate, because we've already put, I think, legal instruments which kind of already do the same things. I don't know if you can explain how that addresses the exchange rate problem, and if there's been a suggestion made about floating the Zimbabwe dollar and dollarizing the economy. What is your comment on that?
Very well. Thank you. From Bloomberg, I have the growth forecast figure for 2022, but as is tradition, we will announce that formal revision during the midterm budget review on the 28th of July next month. Maybe suffice to say for now that we will announce a slightly lower growth rate than the 5.5%. Let me turn to the colleague from Newsday who says, are we in an economic crisis? Look, there's uncertainty everywhere. The global economy, and we're part of the global economy, is facing a challenge, because that's a broader question, around inflation control, around, if I would say the 3 Fs, food, fuel, fertilizer, 3 Fs. So there is a challenge globally around that, and Zimbabwe is no different. And some of these measures are really designed to tackle those kind of issues. I talk about us reducing the fuel levy to deal with excessive increases in fuel. I talked about releasing grain from strategic reserves, but also allowing millers to import freely. That is meant to, again, to ensure food supply. And other measures of this designed to cushion civil servants to make sure that we can increase their purchasing ability, and measures designed again to restore the value of our currency, such as the increase in interest rates. So these are normal policies that any government takes action on in order to deal with the situation that we face, and that is not unique to Zimbabwe. We check with all the other countries in the region, we see a very similar type of action or actions being taken. And across the world, as we speak, US inflation is on a 40-year high. It was last this high 40 years ago. The same thing applies to the UK, and you hear a similar story around the world. So inflation is a challenge everywhere, and all the governments are doing whatever they can to make sure that we bring this issue under control. And that includes the increase in interest rates, making sure that we have real interest rates prevailing in the market. Coming to the colleague from Victoria from Newsday, entrenching the multi-currency into law. Again, let me hand over to Gomatanga or Vumbe.
I think the current legislative framework was not fully entrenching the use of the US dollar. I think amongst one other thing that you'll notice from the statutory instrument we are going to issue later today is that we are also saying that if you are going to go to the banks and borrow in US dollars, you have to repay in US dollars. Because banks were also very much concerned to lend in US dollars because they were worried that you could borrow today in US dollars and 2 years, 3 years from now, you will come and you want to pay in local currency, thereby affecting their balance sheet. So it's another measure that we are actually entrenching in the legislative framework. We did not have that provided in the previous framework that we have. Coming to the issue of whether we are dollarizing or not, I think the position has not shifted, because if you check on two key indicators, one which is the national payment system, and you look at the volume of US dollar transactions versus Zim dollar, you will find that we are still having 70% of the transactions on the national payment system are still in the local currency, our Zim dollar, and only 30% is in US dollars. So there is actually no direct question of whether we should dollarize or not. I think the preference that is there, contrary to popular belief, still indicate that there is a preference for transacting in Zim dollar. It's also even reflected in the revenues of government, in the taxes that we collect. We also collect them in exactly the same ratios, where 70% of our taxes are collected in the local currency and only about 30% is in US dollar. So even when we talk about dollarization, it's very clear that we do not have enough US dollars circulating in the economy to cause us to want to dollarize, because the majority of our citizens, the majority of our corporate are largely still trading in the local currency. And again, then to just come back to add on to whether we are in a crisis or not, I think the Honorable Minister was very clear, because I think for the past 6-7 years, the issue was always around fundamentals, address the fundamentals. And these fundamentals which the Minister announced earlier were the ones where the pressure was coming from to say, address them. And we have addressed them. So now the argument is now shifting to something else. But these are the same fundamentals which everyone was clamoring for, which have been addressed. I would want to add that possibly within the MPC statement that has just been released, the governor should have indicated that for the period ending May 2022, we have had a record inflows for exports at 4.9 billion just up to May, which actually indicates that if we follow the same run rate, we are on course to achieve a record 12 billion of exports. You then ask now the justification for the exchange rate movement that we are seeing against such record exports. There is absolutely no justification. So when we look at those fundamentals, we will argue that we are not in a crisis. We just need to address the behavioral issues that the minister indicated, and these measures, including those announced by the MPC, are meant to do exactly that. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Mr. Vumbe, you want to add something?
Maybe, Honorable Minister, on the crisis issue, I think globally there is a global cost of living crisis, which is arising from the Ukraine-Russian conflict. I think there's no doubt about it that this is also affecting Zimbabwe. And there is been a disruption of global supply chains really also filtering into Zimbabwe, and also the uncertainties in terms of those resumption of these global supply chains. And then the huge increases in freight globally also, we have seen those also impacting heavily in terms of imported inflation. So it's a global uncertainty, and also some of the uncertainties on the recovery post-COVID, where most major companies right now are facing shortages of labor. There's just labor has disappeared for them. So these are issues also affecting the local economy. Thank you.
Very well. I'm sure there are additional questions. I saw Andy lifting his finger. Another colleague at the back, I think it's actually about that.
So thank you, Minister. You mentioned wheat and maize, but those are not the only commodities that are driving prices. That we talk cooking oil, that's importation of soya beans and so on. And it appears that we're focusing on wheat and maize as if that's the only reason why. Well, that's one factor why prices are rising for Zimbabwe citizens. But what about the other commodities, which are basic commodities in their own right, outside of bread and flour and so on?
Thank you.
The question is on fuel, Minister. Citizens continue to ask that why are they being forced to buy blended fuel when there could be a freedom of choice to buy blend?
Thank you. Third one.
Okay, Professor, I just want you to break it down for. I'm passionate about civil servants because of what they do for the country. You announced these changes, and now we have a law coming that allows a retailer out there to sell in US dollars. Are we now saying if Andy Hodges wants to sell his goods in US dollars, the law does not touch him and say he can sell in strictly US dollars, or we'll have that rate going up? Because already, for instance, bread in US dollars is cheaper when you're trying to buy in RTGs. What's your message to a civil servant who has been looking forward to a salary increment in US dollar terms to also try to match up with the reality that's going out there? What's your message to a civil? Can you just address a civil servant who was in that negotiating room last week but one, who said, I'm not happy with the 100% increment in Zim dollars, and I want something in US dollars? Thank you.
I think let's deal with these three, then we do another round. On the question of the why focus on wheat and maize only, let me distribute the questions I'll ask. Please go back to respond to that.
Look, I think obviously you're very right that there is a common basket of about 11 to 14 basic commodities. But I think within that common basket, I think as government, we actually want to focus more on what we regard as the staple food, and which is the basic food consumed by everyone, with no replacement. You cannot replace maize largely, and neither can you replace bread. But you asked the question about cooking oil, but there are other alternatives for cooking oil. And we also have even issues really with the oil expressors to actually question, to say, throughout the years, and when we were still in the bags, you remember we had cooking oil being made from sunflower, from groundnuts, from maize, from cottonseed. We actually need to be asking our oil expressors why now we want 90% of that cooking oil to be expressed from soybeans, which we are importing as soya cake, while we could actually support local production of alternative raws that can actually result in us manufacturing that cooking oil. But the concentration on maize and bread is on the basis that these are the key staple foods that are consumed by the ordinary citizens.
Okay, but you'll still see prices going up in the other commodities, though. That's the issue, isn't it? You may be able to restrain the price of bread and wheat, but the other commodity prices may still start going up, unfortunately. That's the...
Yeah, but within those other 14 basic commodities, we have already taken the necessary intervention by opening up a duty-free importation of those commodities. So we have already intervened to try and curb monopolistic and unreasonable price increases on the other 14 products through that particular SI. And it's actually working, because we've seen prices of some of those basic commodities actually starting to decline. But I think there is always global pressure. If the cooking oil is being only manufactured from soya, which then needs to feed into the general global food crisis, and the increase just even on shipping costs, as Mr. Vumbe indicated. But we believe that the initial SI to open up those other products for importation should actually start to deal with the varying prices of those commodities.
Now, I turn to the question then on blending, that you want to be free to buy any fuel. You don't quite appreciate that everyone is forced to use blended fuel. You see, the blending strategy is one way of curbing sharp increases in fuel prices. And this has worked very well. In fact, without the current blending taking place, the price of fuel would be higher. So this is to your benefit and to the benefit of the public. Most governments around the world practice this policy of blending fuel for that reason. Even in the US, United States, they have a blending policy. And in countries such as Brazil, which are even more advanced in terms of biofuels, you see even more aggressive policies in those kind of countries. So this is not abnormal. It is normal in countries where they're able to do it. And this has been very helpful in containing the sharp increases in prices. The last question had to do with the payment for civil servants in US dollars. As we said earlier, government earns 30% of its revenues in US dollars and 70% in Zimbabwe dollars. It follows, therefore, that whenever we're thinking of the salary increases, you will see more increases in domestic currency in terms of the Zimbabwe dollar than in US dollars. So the current offer has been based on the currency of dominance in terms of these revenues, which is Zimbabwe dollars. So that's where this at least 100% offer is based on. But as I said earlier, and as government has already pronounced, we're continuing our discussions with civil servants to hear their concerns. And again, we look at our coffers to see whether there's any flexibility at all to increase either way, either Zim dollars or US dollars. But as I said, our constraint is this 30-70 inflow in terms of 30% US dollars, 70% Zimbabwe dollars. But also we're putting in place several, numerous non-monetary benefits that I've outlined. It's not just the salary, but also the non-monetary benefits also matter. PS wants to add something.
I think one thing that I also need to highlight is that from a policy perspective, government policy has always been to pay the lowest civil servant 75% of the PDL. That's the policy. That's what we've always aimed for. So if you do the numbers at any exchange rate of the 175, right, added onto the Zimbabwe dollar component, you will actually find that we are now above that 75% threshold. But I think what we've actually seen being propagated on social media is that when we are talking about salaries for teachers, for nurses, there is a deliberate omission of the US dollar 175, as if it's not being paid. So when someone says, oh, they are getting 60,000 as a minimum, they are deliberately excluding the US dollar 175 at official exchange rate. You will find that it takes the overall salary above 100,000 US dollars. And even if you look at the latest number that we have for the poverty datum line, it's actually lower than that number. And so it actually means that from a policy perspective, we are actually within the policy. I would also then want to dispel another notion that has always been shared very widely, to say that previously, during the government of national unity, the minimum salary was 450 US dollars. That's also not correct, because 540 US dollars. That's also not correct, because we know that at that particular moment in time, the exchange rate in the market was 1:2.5. So if you actually want to work out the correct US dollar, you have to take that 540 and divide it by 2.5 to get what was the real exchange rate or the real salary in US dollars. And if you take the 175 US dollars we are currently paying plus the 60 or so thousand as the minimum salary, we are not even far off from what the civil servants were being paid at that particular date. But we have also conveniently converted that as what is to one. But when you actually know that at that particular moment in time, there was an applicable exchange rate in the market, and the real value was around 200 and something US dollars. It's something that had gone on for long to say that they were paid 540. No, it was not 540. It was 540 divided by 2.5, which was the prevailing exchange rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Last three questions. Last three. And so you choose. Let's run an auction of questions here. Highest bidder. Highest bidder.
Go ahead. My name is Emerson Mangezi. I'm from
Mangezi.
Yes, Mangezi from Financial Gazette. My question goes to PS Wamatanga. You spoke about 70% of
25%.
rather you say 70% of transactions are still being done in local currency. But doesn't that concern you? To say that, I think to me, I would feel like it feels as if the ordinary citizens may not be banking at currency, or rather corporates may not also be probably concealing their US dollar transactions. So to say that most of your policies are being informed from that perspective, probably isn't it taking you probably off track, or doesn't it concern you that it means that more US dollars are probably still sloshing around?
Who's next?
Thank you. My name is Shara from Business Weekly. Permanent Secretary Jude Wamatanga said that our exports for up to May were at 4.9 billion. Given that the surrender requirement to the RBZ is about 40%, it means that we are getting about 1.9 billion to the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Monthly to around 392 million. I understand there is a lag. In terms of the money coming into the country, but the disparity between the 392 million versus 25 million that is sold at the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, there is a huge disparity there. Maybe if you just explain how that happens.
Marwaita Godfrey Bloomberg. Just to clarify, the introduction of the gold coins as a store of value, how soon will this be done? And what sort of quantities are we looking at?
Just one winning one, Professor. Yeah.
The fourth one.
Yes, my last one. Yeah, I won't speak again. For this one is directed to the PEMSEC. You said there was a 2.5 exchange rate obtained during the GNU. I need clarity, because when I have a parent who was a civil servant then going to an ATM and getting greenback 500 or 400 depending on their grade, and then you say it was 216. Because yes, when the 2009 when the US dollar came, the salaries were increasing gradually. No one got 250 or any amount at a go. It started as low as 100, even in the private sector. We were getting salaries in the regions of 100, it increased gradually. But my question is clarify PMC. Because when we were going to an ATM with card Ramdara, Tichitora my US, I know she got 400 and something. And now we're talking about an exchange rate. I did the math like you said. It's coming down to 216, but it wasn't 216, it was 400 plus.
Maybe we take a fifth one. What do you think? One more. Yes.
My question is on the pricing of cooking oil. We've seen in the shops the price of cooking oil is priced in US dollars, whereas those companies are actually getting the forex from the auction. So can the minister explain why we actually have such kind of preferential pricing in US dollars for certain products? And also, if we are to make an effective pricing range for all the commodities, why don't we have sort of recommended retail pricing in US dollar, and there is a recommended retail price for the Zim dollar equivalent, so that at least there is no kind of advantage that is being taken by retailers to the clients.
Thank you. 4 questions. The first one is you directed, that's Mangezi, right?
Yes.
Fingers. We talked about the 70-30 split in transactions, and your view is that, well, it is still not really, meaning that our citizens are not banking their US dollars, so I'll direct that to the PS to deal with that.
I think the only other missing aspect of those ratios that I didn't indicate is on the bank deposits. Because even the deposits in the bank also reflect that 70-30 split. So when you have the deposit in the bank reflecting 70-30 split, the revenues reflecting the 70-30 split, and the payments also reflecting the 70-30 split, I think it's a clear indication. Yes, there will be some element of non-banking or of funds circulating outside the formal system. That has always been the case in Zimbabwe, even when we had a mono currency system. But to actually indicate that most of the transactions are still occurring in Zim dollar, up to end of May, about 12.2 trillion was actually transacted as Zim dollar. So we are still seeing that huge preference for Zim dollar. And it's just answering the issue around the 40% from Mr. Sharaf. I think I've just been corrected to say that the 4.9 billion is actually total foreign currency inflows. It's not all, it's cumulative. And it's all foreign currency inflows. So we need to break down and say how much of that were exports and how much is the 40%, and then address your question. Your question might still be relevant. But again, not all of the retention that are at 40%. We've got some companies that have applied because they are recapitalizing, or because they've got special projects that they are running, where they may be allowed to retain more than the 60% for various reasons. So it's not a flat 40% for everyone. I think to explain the 540, the 400 that we're talking about, I also think I will also then add another analogy to that. Why do we have an issue of legacy debts or of funds that were in people's account that they could not access? It's because that 500 was not available to everyone, or even that ATM, it was not all ATMs that it would go to, because I was still in the banking sector during that time. I think only 2 or 3 banks. And if I actually want to give myself credit, one of the banks was the institution that I was working for, where you could, well, it was one of the 3 banks which you could go and withdraw US dollars. But the reason why today we actually speak and we are trying to compensate some of the depositors is because they could not access that money, because it was not there. You could only access it at 2.5, then you were assured of getting it. But at 1:1, it was only to very limited depositors who could actually access their money at that 1:1. But it was not available to everyone.
Thank you, Piers. If I can add on the issue of the gap between what we're adding in terms of gross receipts and what is on the auction. I must say that if we'll do the numbers of the breakdown for you, just to assist. But also there are other liabilities beyond just commitment to the auction by those who need to import. External liabilities that we need to honor, and debt service. So all those again come in to take their share in that 392 million that you mentioned. So there are other liabilities beyond just the auction commitments. You asked about the gold coins. Of course, the Reserve Bank will do further pronouncements on how that will be operationalized in detail. But this is a project that Central Bank has launched, the government has launched through the Central Bank with immediate effect. So it will be rolled out and further information will be provided in terms of how that will operate. But this is a wonderful thing because it will give you yet another asset in which you can store value, in which you can save. So this is actually a very good thing, and the gold price has been quite buoyant. So I hope that you will also buy these coins for store value and not necessarily keep your value in US dollars only. I now come to the cooking oil pricing. I think that if we're now to start gazetting prices, recommending prices, that will be price controls. I don't think that's a good idea. We don't want to institute price controls. It might really cause to serious shortages in the market for some of these commodities if we start doing that. So we should stay away from instituting price controls. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, thank you very, very much.
Anyone for one last bonus question?
Bonus question.
Who is the lucky person?
Oh, I'm the lucky one. I'm Kasbel Mukungai. I'm from the government. So, Mukungai, Minister, you mentioned
from
that.
The government?
Yeah, Minister of Security.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that.
You're not allowed to ask a question.
No. Why not?
No, I'm serious. The Daniel asked us a question. Yeah, you can ask me privately.
Privately?
Yes, because you're a government employee. We want to reserve questions for journalists and others. But please immediately you come over and ask me a question.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, at the back.
Okay, my name is Jason Wandila from ZBC. My question is with respect to the stability, macroeconomic stability. I understand that the foreign currency, the appetite for foreign currency by economic agents has been to do with the need for bring in raw materials, as well as number two, the need to store value. But I understand that the ex-government, what is your position with regards to the appetite that government has for the foreign currency, which has also been triggering the vicious cycle that you have been saying about for the need of the public to continue demanding the foreign currency. So I want to know, in that period that you have stated that the multi-currencies will continue to be in place through the NDS1, what is the government's position maybe as a way of improving the confidence around the Zim dollar, our own local currency, as you might know, that the Zim dollar has created a lot of competitiveness in terms of exports that we are currently having. So I want to know the roadmap for government maybe to support fully the usage of the local currency by maybe minimizing its appetite also on the foreign currency demand.
Thank you very much for colleagues from ZBC. You said Cuthbert, right? Your name? Jefferson. Thank you very much for that multifaceted question. I'll take the aspects of it and other aspects of Matanga to end. You say that the government has appetite for foreign currency and therefore may be increasing demand for foreign currency. That is not the case. Government is able to take care of its foreign currency needs from the 30% or so revenues that we receive in hard currency from our taxes. So we're raising enough US dollars to meet government needs from whatever taxes come in. And in addition to that, whatever we have as excess, we've been using that to support the auction. For the longest while, we've been releasing as much as 15 million per week, between 10 to 15 million per week. Of course, it varies depending on our capacity, but it's the exact opposite. We do not source money from the auction at all as government. But then we've also done more. We've made sure that those that we pay in local currency are also, managed a little bit in terms of, bunching the payments, but also splitting their payments, especially the contractors, splitting their payments, half in hard currency, half in local currency, to make sure that we limit the amount that they may use to approach the power market, and therefore push up the exchange rate. So we're managing all of that, but government is not sourcing money from the auction market at all. Maybe PS, you should add something.
Yeah, no, I think you've covered, Honorable Minister, very, very well, that we do not go into the market to seek foreign currency. We've actually been suppliers of foreign currency into the market by paying some of the contractors and some of our requirements directly in foreign currency, and also, as the Minister has indicated, supporting the auction. So we have been providing, as government, the corporate with this world, as I indicated earlier, with very cheap forex for a very long period of time as government. So we are not the ones that have created excessive demand of foreign currency on the market. It's definitely not government. But just also to reiterate, to say, one of the major issues of confidence in the Zim dollar has been the issue of actually holding it as a store of value. And that's why the monetary policy statement has now addressed that by ensuring that for the first time in a very long period, that we have interest rates that speaks to inflation. And that should actually allow anyone who wants to invest, anyone who wants to save, a decent return of their money in Zim dollars. There is absolutely no need now to get Zim dollars and want to rush to spend it, because you actually be losing value. There will be good value in retaining it, because in our discussion as we were aligning our policies with the central bank, they also indicated that they will also be reviewing the deposit rates so that they are commensurate with the other side of the balance sheet. Because in the past we have only concentrated on the lending rate without ensuring that depositors also get a fair return for their money. This monetary policy statement and the measures we are taking on the fiscal side are now meant to address that key economic fundamental.
Thank you, Komatanga. Vumbe, do you have any additional comments?
Honorable Minister, sorry, there was a question which was asked earlier, which I don't think you addressed, about once this law comes into effect on, putting the multi-currency usage of US dollar and Zim dollar, once it comes into effect, does this effectively mean that businesses, retailers will be able now to charge in US dollars if they want to do that?
They are already doing that. They are already doing that. When were you last in the shops? They're already doing it. But what it does, engenders a much stronger sense of certainty about our currency regime. That the use of the dual currency or multi-currency, more legalistically, is here to stay, at least for the period of the NDS1 period. Just to engender a sense of certainty and no possibility of policy reversals.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you, PS. Thank you, PS. Colleagues, thank you very much. We will be releasing the official statement very shortly, the next 10 minutes, so you all have access to the Minister's presentation.